The moon landing conspiracy is one of the most famous conspiracy theories in modern history. According to this claim, the first moon landing in 1969 never actually happened, and the entire event was supposedly staged by the United States government. Although this idea has been discussed for decades in books, television programs, and on the internet, there is overwhelming scientific and historical evidence showing that humans really did land on the moon. Even so, the conspiracy theory continues to attract attention because it raises interesting questions about trust, evidence, and the spread of misinformation. Studying this subject helps people understand not only one of humanity's greatest achievements, but also the importance of examining extraordinary claims carefully. During the 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union were involved in the space race, a period of intense competition in space exploration. Both countries invested enormous amounts of money and scientific effort into developing rockets, satellites, and spacecraft. The Soviet Union achieved several early successes, including launching the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, and sending the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into space. In response, the United States accelerated its own space program, with the goal of landing astronauts on the moon before the end of the decade. This ambitious objective was announced in 1961 by President John F. Kennedy. At that time, landing on the moon seemed almost impossible because space technology was still developing rapidly. Thousands of engineers, scientists, technicians, and astronauts worked together for many years to solve countless technical problems. New rockets, spacecraft, computers, and communication systems had to be designed and tested before such a dangerous mission could even be attempted. The Apollo program became one of the largest scientific and engineering projects in history. On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The crew consisted of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. After traveling through space for several days, Armstrong and Aldrin entered the lunar module, named Eagle, while Collins remained in orbit around the moon aboard the command module. On July 20, 1969, Eagle successfully landed on the lunar surface. A few hours later, Neil Armstrong became the first human to step onto the moon, famously describing it as one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Millions of people around the world watched the landing on live television. The astronauts spent several hours exploring the surface, collecting rock samples, conducting scientific experiments, and taking photographs. They also planted the American flag and left behind scientific instruments that continued operating after the mission ended. After completing their work, Armstrong and Aldrin returned safely to the command module, and the crew eventually traveled back to Earth, where they received a hero's welcome. Despite the success of the mission, conspiracy theories began appearing only a few years later. Some people claimed that the United States lacked the technology needed to reach the moon. Others argued that the government wanted to win the space race so badly that it secretly filmed the landing in a television studio. These ideas gained popularity through books, magazines, documentaries, and later through websites and social media. Although these claims attracted public interest, they were not supported by credible scientific evidence. One of the most common conspiracy arguments concerns the American flag appearing to wave in photographs. Critics argue that because there is no atmosphere on the moon, the flag should not move. However, scientists explain that the flag contained a horizontal support rod to keep it extended. When astronauts placed the flag into the ground, it continued moving briefly because there was no air resistance to stop the motion quickly. The flag did not wave because of wind, but because it had been physically disturbed during installation. Another frequently discussed claim involves the absence of stars in photographs taken on the moon. Some conspiracy supporters argue that stars should have been visible in the dark sky. In reality, camera settings used by the astronauts were adjusted to photograph the brightly illuminated lunar surface and the astronauts themselves. Since the surface reflected intense sunlight, The cameras used fast shutter speeds and small apertures. These settings prevented the much fainter stars from appearing in the photographs, just as stars are often invisible in daytime photographs taken on Earth. Some people also question why there are no obvious blast craters beneath the lunar module. They argue that the powerful rocket engine should have created a large hole in the moon's surface. Engineers explain that the landing engine was designed to produce only enough thrust for a controlled descent during the final stage of landing. By the time Eagle touched the surface, the engine was operating at relatively low power. As a result, it disturbed dust beneath the spacecraft, but did not create a deep crater. Another conspiracy claim focuses on shadows visible in lunar photographs. Critics sometimes argue that shadows pointing in different directions prove that multiple studio lights were used. However, photographers explain that uneven ground, camera angles, and perspective can easily cause shadows to appear different even when illuminated by a single light source. On the moon, the sun provided extremely bright illumination, while light reflected from the lunar surface also affected the appearance of shadows in photographs. Scientific evidence supporting the moon landings is extensive. During the Apollo missions, astronauts returned to Earth with approximately 382 kilograms of lunar rocks and soil. Scientists from many countries have carefully studied these samples for decades. Their chemical composition differs significantly from rocks naturally found on Earth and matches observations made by later robotic spacecraft. Researchers continue using these lunar samples for scientific studies today, providing strong evidence that they genuinely originated from the moon. Additional evidence comes from equipment that astronauts left on the lunar surface. Several Apollo missions placed special mirrors, known as retroreflectors, on the moon. Scientists around the world continue using lasers to bounce light off these mirrors in order to measure the exact distance between Earth and the moon. These experiments are still performed today and provide direct evidence that human-made equipment remains on the lunar surface. Modern spacecraft have also photographed the Apollo landing sites. High-resolution images taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter clearly show the descent stages of the lunar modules, astronauts' walking paths, scientific instruments, and other equipment left behind during the missions. These photographs were taken decades after the landings by independent spacecraft and strongly support the historical record of the Apollo program. The Soviet Union also provides important evidence. During the space race, the Soviet Union closely monitored American space missions using powerful radar and communication systems. If the moon landing had been faked, Soviet officials would likely have exposed the deception because they were the United States' greatest competitors. Instead, Soviet scientists and government leaders accepted that Apollo 11 had successfully reached the moon. This international recognition further strengthens the credibility of the moon landings. Psychologists have also studied why conspiracy theories become popular. People are sometimes attracted to unusual explanations because they appear exciting or challenge official accounts. In some cases, distrust of governments or large organizations encourages individuals to question historical events without carefully examining the available evidence. The Internet has made it much easier for conspiracy theories to spread rapidly, even when reliable scientific information clearly contradicts them. This highlights the importance of critical thinking and evaluating information from trustworthy sources. The moon landing remains one of humanity's greatest scientific achievements. It demonstrated what international cooperation, advanced engineering, and determined human effort could accomplish. The technologies developed during the Apollo program contributed to improvements in computing, communication, materials science, and many other fields. The success of the missions inspired countless young people to study science, engineering, and mathematics, influencing generations of researchers and innovators. In summary, the moon landing conspiracy continues to attract attention, but the evidence overwhelmingly confirms that the Apollo astronauts really did reach the moon. Scientific research, Lunar rock samples, photographs, laser experiments, independent observations, and historical records all support the success of the Apollo missions. While questioning information can be valuable, conclusions should always be based on reliable evidence rather than speculation. The moon landings remain one of the greatest accomplishments in human history, reminding us that curiosity, scientific knowledge, and determination can achieve goals that once seemed impossible.